A sudden gust of wind swept through the corner of South Congress Avenue in Austin, knocking over the makeshift easel of a young woman with a shaved head. Watercolor paintings scattered across the sidewalk. She slumped down, hands trembling as she tried to save the few remaining pieces. People rushed by, eyes averted, pretending not to notice. Only one man stopped, silently kneeling beside her to reset the easel with gentle, respectful movements. She couldn't have known that this seemingly anonymous moment would mark the beginning of the most beautiful final days of her life. Megan Brooks had just turned 24 when the diagnosis came. Stage 3, lymphoma. The news arrived mere weeks after she'd proudly accepted her fine arts degree, the first in her family to graduate college. An orphan since 16, when her parents' car spun out on an icy bridge, Megan had been on her own for years. She'd worked through college, waiting tables and painting commissioned pieces whenever she could get them. She lived simply in a small studio apartment where the bathroom sink doubled as her palette cleaning station. The walls were adorned with her creations. Watercolors that captured fleeting moments. A child chasing bubbles. An old couple holding hands on a park bench. A paper airplane soaring against a twilight sky. Each painting told a story of connection, the very thing Megan had craved since losing her parents. When the headaches started, she attributed them to stress. When the swollen lymph nodes appeared, she blamed her rundown apartment's poor ventilation. By the time she collapsed during a shift at the diner, the cancer had already spread. No health insurance. No family to help. The medical bills piled up faster than autumn leaves. Chemotherapy costs alone would exceed $80,000. Social services helped with some expenses, but not nearly enough. So Megan did the only thing she could. She painted. Between treatments that left her nauseated and exhausted, she created watercolor pieces to sell on the streets of Austin. Each brushstroke was a small act of defiance against the disease consuming her from within. "I'm still here." Each completed painting seemed to say, "I still create beauty." Nolan Rivers was 38, though the lines around his eyes suggested someone much older. A software engineer at a growing tech firm, he'd built a comfortable life for himself and his daughter in a modest suburban home. Colleagues described him as brilliant, but distant. He spoke only when necessary, attended mandatory social functions with practiced politeness, then retreated back into his private world. What his coworkers didn't know was that Nolan had once been different, passionate, engaged, the first to organize office celebrations. That was before cancer took his wife, Emma, 3 years earlier. Since her death, he'd built walls around himself and his daughter, afraid to connect, afraid to lose again. Emma had been diagnosed too late. By the time the doctors found the pancreatic cancer, it had metastasized. They'd tried everything: surgery, experimental treatments, alternative therapies. None had worked. In the end, Nolan had watched helplessly as his vibrant wife withered away, leaving him alone with their 6-year-old daughter, Ivy. His most painful memory wasn't of the funeral, but of Emma asking him to reach out to others after she was gone. "Promise me you won't disappear," she'd whispered. A promise he'd failed to keep. Ivy Rivers, now 9, was a quiet child with solemn eyes that seemed to take in everything. She hadn't spoken for months after her mother's death, communicating only through nods, head shakes, and occasionally her drawings. Art therapy had finally helped her find her voice again, though she remained more comfortable with crayons and paper than with words. She drew obsessively, especially skies. Endless variations of clouds, sunsets, and storms. When asked why, she simply said, "Because that's where Mom is now." Ivy wore her mother's necklace every day, a small silver pendant with a cloud charm. Her third-grade teacher described her as present but not fully engaged, noting that Ivy often seemed to be looking for something beyond the classroom walls. These 3 souls, each carrying their own particular loneliness, were about to converge at a corner on South Congress Avenue, where fate disguised itself as a sudden Texas wind. The April wind had come without warning, sweeping around the corner of the music store where Megan had set up her small display. She'd chosen this spot carefully, near enough to the popular restaurants to catch tourist traffic, but not so close that shop owners would chase her away. Today hadn't been a good day. The chemotherapy from 2 days before had left her weak, her bones aching as though they'd been hollowed out. But she'd forced herself to come anyway. The medical bills wouldn't pay themselves. When the wind hit, she didn't have the strength to grab her paintings in time. 15 watercolors, representing weeks of work between treatments, scattered across the sidewalk. 3 blew into the street, instantly ruined by passing cars. Megan tried to stand, to salvage what remained, but her legs betrayed her. She sank to the pavement, fighting back tears of frustration and exhaustion. People walked around her, a few glancing with uncomfortable sympathy, but no one stopped. She was invisible, just another struggling street artist in a city full of them. Then a pair of worn leather shoes appeared in her line of vision. Strong, gentle hands began gathering her paintings, treating each one with careful reverence. Megan looked up to see a man in his late 30s, conservatively dressed in a button-down shirt and slacks. His movements were methodical as he collected each piece, studying them briefly before adding them to the stack. When he reached for one that had landed near the curb, a watercolor of a paper airplane soaring through clouds, he paused, seemingly transfixed. "You painted this?" he asked, his voice quiet but clear against the street noise. Megan nodded, reaching for her knit cap that had fallen off, suddenly conscious of her bare scalp with its patchy regrowth. "Yes. All of them." The man, Nolan, didn't comment on her appearance, didn't offer the pitying look she'd grown accustomed to. Instead, he studied the paper airplane painting with genuine interest. "My daughter would love this. She's obsessed with skies." He helped Megan to her feet, steadying her when she swayed slightly. His touch was respectful, neither too familiar nor too distant. He reset her easel, arranging her salvaged works with care. "How much for this one?" he asked, holding up the paper airplane piece. $40, Megan replied, the price feeling simultaneously too high and insultingly low for the hours she'd poured into it. Without hesitation, Nolan reached for his wallet. "I'll take it." Then, looking at the other paintings, he added, "And these 4 as well." Megan blinked in surprise. 5 paintings at once was more than she'd sold in the past 2 weeks combined. That would be $200. Nolan counted out the bills and handed them to her. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Megan noticed his wedding ring was still in place, though something in his demeanor suggested it had been a while since it was relevant. "Thank you," she said, carefully wrapping the selected paintings in protective paper. "Your daughter. What's her name?" "Ivy. She's 9. A brief smile softened his features. "She's going through a phase where everything is skies and clouds." Megan smiled back, a genuine expression that felt foreign on her face. "I went through that phase too. Except mine lasted about 20 years. An awkward silence followed, neither sure how to continue. Megan shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware of how thin she'd become, how her clothes hung on her frame. Nolan glanced at his watch. Then at the nearby cafe. "Would you like to get something to eat?" he asked. The question surprising them both. "I mean, I was about to grab lunch." And he trailed off, seemingly embarrassed by his own impulsiveness. Megan hesitated. She didn't accept invitations from strangers, especially men. But something about Nolan's demeanor, respectful, slightly awkward, without a hint of pity, made her nod. "I could use some food." They settled at a small table outside a cafe, her paintings carefully propped against the wall beside them. Megan ordered soup, knowing her stomach couldn't handle much else. Nolan chose a sandwich, eating methodically while asking thoughtful questions about her art. He didn't pry about her health, though his eyes occasionally flickered to her cap and thin frame. Instead, he talked about Ivy's drawings, about how art had helped his daughter through grief. "My wife died 3 years ago," he explained quietly. "Cancer." The word hung between them. An unwelcome connection. "I'm sorry," Megan said, meaning it. Then, after a moment's consideration, she pulled off her knit cap. "I'm fighting it myself. Stage 3, lymphoma." Nolan nodded. His expression, not of pity, but of somber understanding. "How's the battle going?" "I'm here," she replied with a small shrug. Some days that's victory enough. For the first time in months, Megan ate a complete meal, nourished as much by the conversation as by the food itself. When they parted ways, Nolan carefully handling his newly purchased artwork, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. A connection, however brief, with another human being who saw her as more than just her illness. She didn't expect to see him again. 3 days later, Nolan returned to South Congress Avenue, scanning the sidewalk for Megan's makeshift gallery. He found her in the same spot, looking even more tired than before, a different collection of watercolors displayed on her easel. She seemed surprised to see him, straightening slightly as he approached. "You came back," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair under her cap. "I did," Nolan replied, hands in his pockets. Ivy loved the paintings, especially the paper airplane one. "It's hanging in her room now." Megan smiled. "I'm glad." Nolan cleared his throat, seemingly working up to something. "I have a proposition for you. My company is renovating our office space. The walls are blank, sterile. We need art." He gestured to her paintings. "We need your art." "My art?" Megan echoed, confusion evident in her voice. 27 pieces, Nolan continued. "For our main conference rooms, reception area, and central corridor. Commissioned work. Properly paid. Professional installation." Megan stared at him, trying to process his words. "Why me? There are galleries full of established artists in this city. Because your work has something theirs doesn't." Nolan gestured to a watercolor of an elderly man feeding pigeons. "Life. Real life, with all its fragility and beauty." Megan shook her head, doubt clouding her features. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't commit to that kind of timeline. I have treatments, and some days I can barely hold a brush steady." She hesitated, then added quietly, "I might not be here long enough to finish." "We'll work around your schedule," Nolan insisted. "Whatever you can create, whenever you can create it." "Why are you doing this?" Megan asked, genuine bewilderment in her voice. "You don't even know me." Nolan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "When my wife was dying, she asked for one thing: that I help someone else fighting the same battle. I refused. I was too caught up in my own grief, my own fear of loss." His voice grew softer. "I told her I couldn't bear to watch someone else go through what she was experiencing. It was the most selfish moment of my life." He met Megan's eyes directly. "I'm not making that mistake again. This isn't charity. It's business. We need art. You create beautiful art. But it's also me keeping a promise I should have kept 3 years ago." Megan studied him, weighing his words against her pride, her independence. Finally, she nodded. "If I don't live to see this through," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words, "at least I'll leave something beautiful behind." It began slowly, this unusual connection between 3 wounded souls. First came the business arrangement, a formal contract from Nolan's company, Tech Vista Solutions, commissioning Megan for 27 watercolor pieces at a surprisingly generous fee. The contract made no mention of deadlines, only that pieces would be delivered as completed. The advance payment covered 2 months of Megan's medical bills, giving her breathing room she hadn't had since her diagnosis. Then came the logistics. Megan couldn't work effectively in her tiny apartment, especially on larger pieces. Nolan offered his home sunroom, with its abundant natural light and spacious work tables. Initially, Megan visited only during business hours, when Nolan was at work and Ivy at school. She'd set up her supplies, lose herself in painting for hours, then clean up and leave before they returned. She left completed pieces on the table with simple notes. "For conference room" or "for reception area." The arrangement shifted one rainy afternoon when Megan lost track of time, absorbed in a particularly challenging landscape. She was still mixing colors when the front door opened and a small voice called out, "Dad, is someone here?" Ivy appeared in the sunroom doorway, school backpack still on her shoulders, eyes wide with curiosity. She stared at Megan, then at the half-finished painting. "You're the cloud lady," Ivy said matter-of-factly. "Dad bought your paper airplane picture." Megan smiled, setting down her brush. That's me. I'm Megan. I'm Ivy. Like the plant, but not as clingy. She approached the work table, studying the watercolor in progress. A sunrise over Austin's skyline. Your clouds are different than mine. They have more shape. Would you like to see how I do them? Megan offered. Ivy nodded eagerly, dropping her backpack to the floor and climbing onto the stool beside Megan. When Nolan arrived home an hour later, he found them still there, heads bent together over the table. Ivy carefully applying wash to paper under Megan's guidance. Something in his chest tightened at the sight. His daughter, engaged and animated in a way he hadn't seen since before Emma's death. That evening, Megan stayed for dinner. It was nothing special. Spaghetti that Nolan prepared while the painting lesson continued. They ate at the kitchen table, Ivy chattering about school and showing off her new cloud techniques. When Megan rose to leave, visibly exhausted, Nolan insisted on driving her home. In the car, she apologized for overstaying. "Don't," he said simply. "It's the first time I've heard Ivy laugh like that in years." After that, the boundaries blurred. Megan began spending most days at the Rivers home, working on the commissioned pieces. On good days, when the chemotherapy side effects weren't overwhelming, she'd stay for dinner, sometimes helping to prepare it. On bad days, when nausea and fatigue claimed her, Nolan would set up a recliner in the sunroom where she could rest between bursts of painting. Ivy took to calling these cloud-watching days and would often sit quietly beside Megan, drawing or reading, offering silent companionship. They formed an unusual routine. Ivy would show Megan her school art projects. Nolan would discuss color schemes for the office spaces. Megan taught them both techniques: how to layer watercolors for depth, how to capture light and shadow. In the evenings, they'd sometimes watch movies together, Megan wrapped in a blanket on the couch, Ivy curled up beside her. No one acknowledged what was happening, that they were becoming a family of sorts, drawn together by creativity and unspoken understanding of loss. No one mentioned that Megan's bad days were becoming more frequent, that her medications were multiplying, that her already thin frame was growing more fragile. Instead, they created moments. Nolan hung white fairy lights in the sunroom to brighten the space on dreary days. Ivy made paper cranes, hanging them from the ceiling above Megan's work table. Megan started a special project, a large collaborative piece that she and Ivy worked on together, adding elements a little at a time. "What is it going to be?" Ivy asked one evening, as they added layers to the mysterious work. "It's us," Megan replied softly. "It's what we're building here, but there aren't any people in it," Ivy pointed out, studying the abstract landscape of sky, water, and distant shore. "Not all family portraits need faces," Megan told her, mixing a perfect cerulean blue. "Sometimes it's the feeling that matters most." Nolan, watching from the doorway, felt something long dormant stirring in his chest. His home felt alive again, filled with color, conversation, and the quiet comfort of shared space. He found himself looking forward to returning from work, to hearing about Ivy's day, to seeing what new creation had emerged from Megan's hands. And Megan, who had prepared herself to die alone in a sterile hospital room, instead found herself surrounded by warmth and purpose. For the first time since her diagnosis, she wasn't just fighting to survive. She was living. The weeks passed. 21 paintings completed. 6 more to go. And one special piece. The collaboration with Ivy, growing more beautiful with each session. The exhibition was scheduled for a Thursday evening at Tech Vista's newly renovated headquarters. Megan's watercolors had been professionally framed and hung throughout the space. Landscapes, abstract compositions, and delicate still lifes transforming the corporate environment into something warm and inviting. The company had turned the event into a proper gallery opening, complete with catered refreshments, soft jazz, and printed catalogs featuring Megan's work. Nolan had insisted on buying Megan a new dress for the occasion, a simple, elegant piece in deep blue that complemented her returning wisps of hair. Ivy had crafted a crown of paper flowers for her to wear, meticulously folded from handmade paper in shades matching the watercolors. "Real queens wear diamonds," Ivy explained solemnly as she placed it on Megan's head. "But art queens wear paper. The turnout exceeded all expectations. Tech Vista employees filled the space, along with local art enthusiasts who'd received invitations. Megan stood in the center of it all, paper crown slightly askew, receiving compliments and answering questions about her techniques. Her face flushed with a combination of excitement and fever. She'd refused to take her full dose of pain medication, wanting to be fully present for the evening. "Your work is extraordinary," said a tall woman in a tailored suit, introducing herself as the director of Horizon Gallery, one of Austin's most prestigious art spaces. "We're planning a new Voices in Texas art exhibition next spring. I'd like to feature your work prominently." Megan smiled, a complicated expression that Nolan, watching from across the room, understood all too well. Next spring was a lifetime away for someone measuring time in treatments and remissions. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'm honored by your interest." Throughout the evening, Ivy stayed close to Megan's side, a self-appointed guardian. When Megan needed to sit, Ivy would quietly bring a chair. When conversations went too long, Ivy would intervene with polite but firm interruptions. "Megan needs to see the other paintings now," she'd announce, taking Megan's hand and leading her away. As the event reached its midpoint, Nolan stepped to the small podium that had been set up in the main reception area. The room quieted as he tapped the microphone. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his normally reserved demeanor giving way to something more animated. "As TechVista's chief engineer, I typically speak about software architecture and systems design. Tonight, I'm here to talk about something equally structured, but infinitely more beautiful. The work of an extraordinary artist who has transformed our workspace and, in many ways, our perspective." He gestured to Megan, who stood near the back wall, Ivy's hand firmly clasped in hers. "When I first encountered Megan Brooks's work, what struck me wasn't just her technical skill, though that's considerable. It was her ability to capture moments of connection, between people, between elements, between states of being. In a world increasingly fragmented by technology, the very technology our company develops, her art reminds us of what truly matters." Nolan paused, his gaze finding Megan's across the room. "What many of you don't know is that Megan created these 21 pieces while undergoing aggressive treatment for lymphoma. Each brushstroke represents not just artistic vision, but profound courage." A murmur ran through the crowd. Many looked at Megan with new understanding, seeing beyond the paper crown to the frailty beneath. "Tonight, I'm pleased to announce that Tech Vista has established a permanent acquisition fund for Megan's work, ensuring that her vision will continue to inspire our team for years to come." Additionally, his voice grew slightly less steady. "Our employees have come together to raise $73,000 to cover Megan's remaining medical expenses." Gasps and applause filled the room. Megan's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Ivy squeezed her hand tightly, beaming up at her with fierce pride. "And finally," Nolan continued when the room quieted again, "we've created a new position at Tech Vista, Artist in Residence, with Megan Brooks as our inaugural appointee. This arrangement includes comprehensive health insurance and the freedom to create without the burden of financial insecurity." The applause was thunderous. Colleagues who barely knew Nolan looked at him with new respect, seeing dimensions to the quiet engineer they'd never suspected. Megan made her way slowly to the podium, clearly overwhelmed, her paper crown tilting precariously. "I don't have prepared remarks," she said when the room finally quieted. "Artists aren't known for our planning skills." A gentle laugh rippled through the audience. "When I set up my easel on South Congress Avenue 4 months ago, I was painting to survive. Literally. I never imagined that my work would find a home like this, or that I would find." She glanced at Nolan and Ivy. "The kind of support that makes creation possible." She paused, visibly gathering her strength. "I don't know how much time I have. None of us do, really. But I promise to fill whatever time remains with as much beauty as I can create." As she stepped away from the podium, Ivy rushed forward to adjust her crown. Standing on tiptoes, the little girl whispered something in Megan's ear that made her smile through her tears. The crowd continued to applaud. But Nolan, watching from a few steps away, saw what others missed. The slight tremor in Megan's hands, the way she leaned on Ivy for support, the paleness beneath her flush of excitement. The most poignant image of the evening wasn't captured in any of the photographs taken by Tech Vista's marketing team. It was Megan, seated in an armchair in the corner of the reception area, paper crown slightly askew, bathed in the warm light of the gallery spotlights. For that brief moment, she looked like a queen taking her final bow, regal, beloved, and slowly slipping away. The days following the exhibition brought a flurry of interest in Megan's work. Art blogs featured her watercolors. Local newspapers ran stories about the exhibition. The Horizon Gallery director called repeatedly, eager to secure pieces for the spring show. Through it all, Megan retreated further into the sanctuary of Nolan's sunroom, her energy conserved for two things only: completing the commissioned pieces and working on the special project with Ivy. The chemotherapy intensified. Dr. Leland, Megan's oncologist, had been encouraged by her improved spirits and support system, recommending a more aggressive treatment protocol that might extend her prognosis. The side effects were brutal. Days when Megan could hold a brush steady became fewer. Mornings when she could manage solid food grew rare. Yet still, she painted. On good days, she would complete entire pieces in bursts of feverish creativity. On bad days, she would direct Ivy's hand, guiding the child through basic washes and techniques. Like this, she would whisper, her voice thin but determined. "See how the pigment follows the water? That's the secret. You don't control it entirely. You suggest. And then, you let it find its own path." Nolan rearranged his work schedule, taking early morning meetings remotely so he could be home when Megan needed assistance. He learned to prepare the special protein shakes that sometimes stayed down when nothing else would. He mastered the art of setting up her easel at precisely the right height to minimize strain on her weakening arms. One evening, after Ivy had gone to bed, Megan sat wrapped in blankets on the living room sofa, watching the embers fade in the fireplace. Nolan brought her tea, sitting beside her with quiet companionship. "I need to ask something of you," Megan said finally, her voice barely audible. "When I'm gone, don't keep my paintings locked away, not even the ones you bought personally." Nolan looked at her, trying to hide the pain her words evoked. "They're yours to decide about. Art isn't meant to be hoarded," she continued. "It needs to breathe, to be seen, to connect with people." She reached for his hand, her fingers thin and cool against his palm. "Promise me you'll let them fly, Nolan. Like paper airplanes. Let them go where they need to go." He nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. "And Ivy," Megan added, her eyes drifting toward the ceiling where paper cranes hung from invisible threads. "She has a gift, not just technical skill. Lots of children have that. She sees things others miss, like her mother." Nolan whispered. Emma could always see beneath the surface. Megan smiled weakly. "Then she has both of you in her art. Promise you'll nurture that, whatever form it takes." "I promise," he said, meaning it completely. The next morning, Ivy found Megan already in the sunroom, struggling to mix colors with trembling hands. The child silently took over, following Megan's whispered instructions until the precise shade of blue emerged. "If you go away," Ivy said suddenly, carefully applying the blue to their collaborative piece, "who will teach me how to paint clouds?" Megan was quiet for a long moment, watching Ivy's careful brushstrokes. "You'll teach yourself," she finally replied. "Clouds are dreams made visible, Ivy, and dreams don't die, even when dreamers do." Ivy considered this, her small face solemn. "Mom used to say that the clouds were where she would wait for me. Is that where you'll go too?" "I don't know," Megan admitted. "But wherever I am, I'll still be connected to you through this." She gestured to their painting. "Through every piece we've created together." Ivy nodded, accepting this with the straightforward pragmatism of childhood. "Then we should finish it soon. Just in case." They worked through the morning, side by side, adding layers of detail to the collaborative piece, a landscape that had evolved to include a distant shoreline, a small boat, and a sky filled with both storm clouds and breaks of sunlight. By noon, Megan was exhausted. Her breathing labored. "I think I need to rest now," she whispered. Ivy helped her to the recliner, carefully arranging blankets around her thin frame. "Is this a cloud-watching day?" "Yes." Megan smiled faintly. "The best kind." The call came at 2:17 in the afternoon. Nolan was in a project meeting when his phone buzzed with Ivy's name. She was using the emergency phone he'd given her for days when Megan was alone with her. "Dad." Ivy's voice was steady but tight with tension. "Megan needs to go to the hospital now. She can't get up, and she's having trouble breathing." Nolan drove home in a blur of fear, calling Dr. Leland's office from his car. By the time he arrived, the paramedics were already loading Megan into an ambulance. Ivy stood on the front lawn, clutching their unfinished painting, refusing to let it out of her sight. "I'm coming too," she insisted, when Nolan suggested she stay with a neighbor. "She needs us both." At Austin Memorial Hospital, the staff moved with practiced efficiency, transferring Megan to the oncology floor where Dr. Leland was waiting. Tests confirmed what they already suspected. The cancer had spread to her lungs. Her body, weakened by months of treatment, could no longer fight effectively. Hours passed in the sterile hospital room. Monitors beeped. Nurses came and went, adjusting IVs, checking vital signs. Megan drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes confused, sometimes lucid. Nolan sat beside her bed, holding her hand. Ivy curled up in a chair in the corner, still clutching their painting, refusing food or drink. As evening settled, Megan's breathing grew more labored. Dr. Leland increased her morphine, explaining quietly to Nolan that comfort was now their primary goal. The unspoken message was clear. The end was near. Around midnight, Megan's eyes fluttered open. She seemed to see through the dimness of the room with unusual clarity. "Nolan," she whispered. "Ivy." They moved closer, Ivy climbing carefully onto the edge of the bed, mindful of the tubes and wires. "I thought I would die alone," Megan said, each word an effort. "I never imagined having a family at the end." Ivy's tears fell silently, dropping onto the hospital blanket. "Don't go," she pleaded. "I'll draw clouds for you every day." Megan's smile was ghostly in the dim light. "You already have, sweet girl. The most beautiful clouds." Nolan felt his own composure cracking, years of carefully maintained control giving way to raw grief. "Megan, Shh," she interrupted gently. "I need to tell you something." She drew a labored breath. "I finished it. The painting. My part, at least." Her gaze drifted to the canvas Ivy still held. "The rest is yours now. Both of yours." Ivy looked down at the painting, noticing for the first time the tiny figures Megan had added to the distant shore. 3 small silhouettes, holding hands, facing the horizon. "It's us," the child whispered. Understanding blooming across her tear-streaked face, Megan nodded weakly. "Family isn't always born. Sometimes it's painted, one brushstroke at a time." Her eyes found Nolan's, conveying something words couldn't capture. Gratitude, affection, and a peace that transcended her failing body. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "Thank you," he whispered, "for showing us how to live in color again." Megan's lips curved in a final smile. Her gaze drifted to the ceiling, perhaps seeing beyond it to infinite skies. The heart monitor's steady rhythm faltered, then flattened into a continuous tone. Ivy pressed her face against Megan's now still hand, arms wrapped tightly around the canvas that held their final collaboration. Nolan gathered both his daughter and his grief into his arms, tears flowing freely for the first time since Emma's death. In that sterile hospital room, illuminated only by the glow of medical equipment and the faint moonlight through half-drawn blinds, 3 souls who had found each other against all odds formed a tableau of love and loss, a composition as poignant as any Megan had ever painted. The funeral was small but meaningful. Held in a chapel, filled with Megan's artwork, Nolan had arranged for her paintings to be displayed throughout the space, watercolors showing the beauty she'd captured even while fighting for her life. The flower arrangements were simple, dominated by blue and purple blooms that echoed her favorite palette. Ivy stood beside her father at the front of the chapel, solemn in a blue dress, the paper flower crown she had made for Megan resting atop the closed casket. She hadn't spoken much since the hospital, but her hands remained busy, folding paper cranes, mixing watercolors, completing the collaborative painting with careful, deliberate brushstrokes. When it came time for words to be shared, Nolan stepped forward, unfolding a letter he'd found among Megan's belongings in the sunroom. Her final message, addressed to them both. "Dear Nolan and Ivy," he read, his voice steady despite the weight in his chest. "If you're reading this, I've moved on to whatever comes next. Please don't think of me as gone. Think of me as painting in another place, mixing new colors, finding new perspectives." He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "Ivy, my brave cloud painter. Remember that art isn't about perfection. It's about truth. Your truth will always be beautiful, even when it's stormy. Look for me in the skies you love so much. But don't spend too much time looking up. The world needs your vision right here, right now." Ivy wiped tears from her cheeks, nodding as though Megan could see her promise. "Nolan, my unexpected friend. You gave me a family when I thought I would die alone. You created space for beauty when all I could see was ending. Now I ask you to create space for joy again. For yourself. For Ivy. For all the colors still waiting in your future." The small gathering was silent, moved by words that somehow bridged the gap between present and absent, between grieving and healing. "I leave you both with this final thought," Nolan read, his voice catching slightly. "The most beautiful thing about watercolors is that they're never truly fixed. They remain somewhat fluid, responsive to light, changing with perspective. Love is like that too. It doesn't disappear when someone is gone. It shifts, it adapts, it finds new channels. I am not disappearing. I'm just flowing into a different form." In the days that followed, Nolan established the Megan's Wings Foundation, dedicated to supporting young artists facing serious illness. The first fundraiser featured a silent auction of Megan's remaining works, raising over $100,000. True to his promise, Nolan didn't keep her art locked away. He ensured it found homes where it would be appreciated, where it would connect with people who needed its particular beauty. Ivy returned to school, carrying a sketchbook everywhere she went. Her art teacher noted a remarkable evolution in her work. More confidence, more emotion, more willingness to let the medium find its own path rather than trying to control every element. When asked about the change, Ivy simply said, "I had a really good teacher for a little while." Each evening, she added to her collection of cloud studies, dozens of watercolor skies filling a special portfolio. "One for every day," she explained to her father. "So Megan can see I'm keeping my promise." Nolan found himself slowly emerging from the protective shell he'd built around himself. He accepted dinner invitations from colleagues. He volunteered at Ivy's school. He spoke openly about both Emma and Megan, acknowledging the profound impact both women had had on his life. The walls he'd constructed after Emma's death gradually lowered, allowing connection again. And every morning, father and daughter paused before the collaborative painting, now hanging in their living room, the landscape with 3 small figures on a distant shore, facing a horizon where storms and sunshine coexisted in the same vast sky. 1 year later, on the anniversary of Megan's passing, Nolan and Ivy visited Horizon Gallery, where a special exhibition of Megan's work had been arranged. Her watercolors filled the main gallery space, professionally lit and displayed. The centerpiece was the collaborative painting, positioned so that natural light from the skylight fell directly upon it throughout the day. Ivy carried a bouquet of white flowers, her steps measured and solemn as they approached the painting. They stood together in silence, each lost in their own memories of the woman who had transformed their lives in such a brief time. Nolan noticed for the first time a small inscription in the corner of the canvas, Megan's delicate handwriting, nearly invisible unless viewed from exactly the right angle. "Family isn't always born. Sometimes it's painted, one brushstroke at a time." Ivy reached up, touching the frame lightly. "She was like a mother to me," she whispered, "even if it was just for a little while." Nolan nodded, placing his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "She gave us back our colors when all we could see was gray." They remained there a few moments longer, then turned to leave, Ivy still clutching her white flowers. As they walked toward the gallery exit, sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the path before them. Above, visible through the skylight, fluffy clouds drifted across an impossibly blue sky, a perfect match for Megan's favorite shade of cerulean. "Dad," Ivy said softly as they stepped outside. "I think I'm ready to teach someone else how to paint clouds." Nolan smiled, squeezing his daughter's hand. "I think Megan would like that very much." They walked together into the bright afternoon, leaving the gallery behind but carrying with them the most precious gift Megan had given, the understanding that family, like art, can emerge from the most unexpected combinations of circumstances, creating beauty that endures long after the artist is gone.